Your brain has a waste clearance pathway that works best during sleep, and when sleep is poor, that buildup can quietly grow in the background. If this system is sluggish, your memory, focus, and mental sharpness can start to feel off long before you notice anything obviously wrong. By the end of this, you'll understand the mechanism, why it matters, and why so many people misunderstand what's really happening. But the part most people miss is this: why does it switch on only at night? Your brain doesn't clear waste the same way all day. During the day, your brain keeps that pathway relatively quiet. At night, it becomes much more active, and fluid movement increases so waste can move out more efficiently. That means a short night can leave more of that debris hanging around, and over time that may affect how sharp, calm, and mentally organized you feel. But that still doesn't explain why the brain waits until sleep to open the drains. Your brain's cleanup system is not just a metaphor. During sleep, the brain's waste clearance pathway becomes more active, and the fluid around your brain moves more freely, helping remove waste faster. That means a bad night does not just make you tired, it can change the biological environment your brain has to work in the next day. You've been told it's just aging. It's not. It's a specific, measurable biological process. Your brain is like a city with narrow service roads, and when those roads do not open properly at night, cleanup slows down and debris lingers where it should not. The result is subtle at first: fog, slower recall, that weird sense that your thoughts are moving through syrup. But that still does not explain why the system seems to care so much about sleep state over clock time. The drain opens at night because the brain's clearance system is tied to sleep physiology, not just the passage of time. Studies show that sleep is associated with larger interstitial space, stronger cerebrospinal fluid exchange, and faster waste clearance, while poor sleep is linked with impaired glymphatic function and worse memory outcomes in older adults. But that still leaves the real mystery. If sleep turns the system on, what exactly is the signal that tells the brain to switch from thinking mode to cleaning mode? The brain switches into cleanup mode at night because sleep changes the whole fluid environment around it, not just consciousness. In sleep, the interstitial space expands, CSF exchange rises, and the brain clears waste faster. Poor sleep is linked to weaker glymphatic function and worse memory in older adults. That is the clue most people miss. It is not simply more hours in bed. It is a state change, where the sleeping brain behaves like a city that finally opens its service tunnels after rush hour. But that still leaves the bigger question: what biological switch tells the brain to open those tunnels only when you sleep? The biological switch is beginning to look like norepinephrine. During deep non-dream sleep, a brain chemical called norepinephrine rises and falls in a slow rhythm. Blood vessels pulse in sync, and the fluid around the brain moves more effectively. That is why the issue is deeper than sleeping enough. The brain is not just turning off awareness, it is entering a very specific vascular and fluid state, and that state is what lets the drain work. But the next question is the uncomfortable one. If the system depends on a precise sleep rhythm, what happens when modern sleep fragments that rhythm night after night? The next step is to show the cost of disrupting that rhythm. Poor sleep is not just a comfort problem. Recent human data in older adults links worse sleep quality with disrupted glymphatic-brain relationships and memory decline. You start seeing it in small ways first. Names slip, attention stutters, a thought arrives late, like a train that missed the platform by seconds. And because the system depends on the timing and microarchitecture of NREM sleep, fragmentation can interfere with the norepinephrine-driven flow that powers clearance. That is the part people overlook. The brain is not failing to clean itself for no reason. The cleanup is being interrupted by a sleep pattern that no longer gives the system enough uninterrupted time to do its work. But that still leaves one last problem. If the evidence is this strong, why has this mechanism been so easy to miss? The explanation you've been given for years. It may be missing the most important variable. For a long time, people talked about sleep like it was a passive shutdown, a dimmer switch for the mind. But that picture is too simple. Sleep is not just what happens when the brain goes quiet. It is a state with its own biology, and that biology changes the way fluid moves through brain tissue. That matters because the drain is not powered by time alone. It is powered by a very specific internal rhythm that sleep helps create. Think of it like a building with pumps hidden behind the walls. During the day, the lights are on, people are moving, and the service lines stay restricted. At night, the whole system shifts. The pumps change pace. The space between the cells opens. The fluid starts moving in a way that daytime wakefulness simply does not allow. And once you see that, the real question becomes sharper. If the system depends on this rhythm, what happens when the rhythm gets broken before the work is done? That is where the story gets uncomfortable. Modern sleep often looks like sleep on paper, but not all sleep gives the brain the same cleanup window. Fragmented nights, shallow sleep, and repeated awakenings can interrupt the conditions that support glymphatic flow, and recent human studies link poorer sleep with weaker glymphatic-brain relationships and worse memory outcomes in older adults. So the problem is not only that you slept less, it is that the state the brain needed may have been interrupted before the drain could fully open. And that creates the biggest blind spot of all. People hear sleep problem and assume the issue is just rest. But the brain is not asking for rest in the abstract. It is asking for the right internal conditions, in the right order, for long enough to complete a biological job. If those conditions do not arrive cleanly, the cleanup slows, the debris stays longer, and the consequences can show up quietly, long before anyone calls it a memory problem. But the next question is the one researchers are still trying to pin down. What exactly is the brain doing differently in the people who sleep badly, and how does that change the network itself? The real mechanism is starting to come into focus now. In NREM sleep, norepinephrine oscillations, vessel pulsing, and CSF movement line up like a coordinated pump, and that rhythmic pattern is a strong predictor of glymphatic clearance. So this is not a vague sleep helps the brain story. It is a timing story. The brain enters a very specific microarchitectural state, and that state is what powers cleanup. When that state is disturbed, the drain loses force. That is why fragmented sleep can be so deceptive. It may still look like sleep, but biologically it does not behave the same way. And now, the next layer matters. The human data do not just show a weak association. They suggest that poor sleepers have a disrupted glymphatic-brain relationship, and that disruption is linked to memory decline in older adults. But that still leaves the question that should bother everyone. If the mechanism is this specific, why do so many people misread the warning signs for years? The evidence is where the story stops being theoretical. In a 2024 study of older adults, better sleep quality was linked to healthier glymphatic-brain relationships, and those relationships were tied to memory performance. In poor sleepers, that connection was disrupted. That matters because it moves the discussion out of abstract physiology and into real human outcome. The brain network itself appears to behave differently when sleep quality is poor. Think of it like a traffic system. It is not enough that the roads exist. The timing of the lights, the volume on the roads, and the coordination between the routes all matter. In the brain, the glymphatic pathway, the vascular rhythm, and the larger network of connections all have to line up for cleanup and memory-related signaling to cooperate. When they do not, the system does not simply slow down, it changes shape, and that is why the research is so interesting. The 2022 systematic review found that sleep problems were repeatedly associated with changes in CSF-related features and glymphatic exchange, but the pattern was not universal across every condition. In other words, this is not a one-note explanation that applies the same way to every person. It is a biological pattern with context, variation, and hidden dependencies. That makes it harder to spot, and it makes it easier to miss for years. But the next question goes even deeper. If the evidence is this broad, what is the missing piece that modern sleep may be starving the brain of? It is now time for the missing piece. The brain is not only following sleep depth and chemical rhythms, it is also being guided by your internal body clock, and melatonin appears to be part of that nighttime signal. Think of melatonin as part signal, part atmosphere. It rises in the dark, aligns the brain for sleep, and may help shape the conditions under which CSF flow and waste clearance are strongest. The 2022 systematic review also found that sleep disturbances are linked with changes in CSF-related measures and glymphatic exchange. But the pattern varies across different conditions. So the missing piece is not one magic factor. It is the loss of a coordinated nighttime state. That is what modern life can blur. Artificial light, inconsistent sleep timing, and fragmented nights can weaken the very signals that tell the brain it is time to shift from accumulation to clearance. And once that signal is unreliable, the drain is no longer working inside a clean biological window. It is working in a noisy one. That is the deeper misunderstanding. People think the brain clears itself because they went to bed. The truth is that the brain clears itself because multiple nighttime signals line up. Your body has been signaling this for longer than you think. Now you know how to see it. If this changed how you think about your body, subscribe and explore the rest of the series in the description below. This content is for educational purposes only and does not replace medical advice. If you have persistent sleep, memory, or fatigue issues, it's worth talking with a healthcare professional.